Don't worry about it. We're ready to go. Good morning, everybody. We're going to begin the January IAC meeting. It is 9:06, and we do have a quorum. So I'd like to welcome everybody and call the meeting to order. I would like to ask if there are any revisions to the agenda.
No revisions.
No revisions.
No public comments.
And no public comments. All right, well, let's move right into our agenda. On the consent agenda, we have the minutes, approval of contracts, and approval of closed projects. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Do I have a second? Second. All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carried. All right, the next in your book on section 2, we have the review and certification for public school reviews and a motion. I think we have someone coming up to present that. Is that Clarence? Good morning, Clarence. Nice to see you. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We're on a roll here.
Efficient.
Certainly.
So we're talking about the certification. I was a little preoccupied. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Booting right up.
Well, Madam Chair, while Clarence is getting set up, within 1783, we were asked to create these certifications for LEAs to do things on their own. We'll still receive information from them, but to speed things along, to streamline the process. This is one of the items. The others that we still have to create certifications for are the education specification process, and we have a piece that will fit into that later in the agenda today. Schematic design, which we have to develop what it is that we need to have to keep records, and preventive maintenance schedules, which is something that probably won't be difficult because preventive maintenance is already under the comprehensive maintenance plans, but we'll need to work with the LEAs to see what's going to add value for them, and we will. We'll talk about all of these other 3 items with the planners at a meeting next week that we have at MABE. Thank you,
Great.
Madam Chair.
Thank you. All right, Clarence, you ready?
Yep. I'm sorry. I'm not going to shoot from the cuff on this. I'm going to bring up my notes.
Should I read the motion? No.
Oh, wait.
All right, here we go. So as Bob had brought out, that there's a 2-part to this. DGS handles the CDs and the DDs, and so the certification relates to those phases of the review process for the LEAs. So the purpose of this action is to give the LEAs, the local agencies, the opportunity to prove that they are eligible to maintain a team of professionals to review a complete set of project documents, that being design and construction documents. The Department of General Services will make a determination which LEAs meet these requirements for the review certification. By meeting the set requirements, the LEAs will perform a project review to the same level of service that DGS is currently doing for the LEAs. The LEA review certification is valid for 5 years, but subject to revocation by means of an audit that would be done by DGS. If the performance is unsatisfactory, there will be consequences to it. Not consequences, but if they're shown to be unqualified to meet the certification, they have an opportunity to reapply in about a year's time. A simple fillable electronic form will be provided to the LEAs to submit for each project they intend to review. This will provide a means for the IAC to continue to document design and construction of projects. And just on that note, with the IAC, with what is going on, that documentation is important, keeping track of the projects. And so the business management system that I know Bob Gorell and the IAC team has been working on, I really truly look forward to that, because that's going to allow us as a department to be more coincide with the IAC in tracking the departments, because as Bob brought out, they're doing the SDs, we're doing the DDs and the CDs, and we really need to bring that to a oneness in tracking it, and I believe that the business management system will be able to do that. So though an LEA may reach out for certification, which waives the DGS review process, it will be the Department of General Services' desire to become a greater support in partnership with the local agencies. And what the certification intention is to streamline. That was the whole purpose of getting this certification online, is to streamline the process, get these projects reviewed. And so by putting this in place, it'll diminish we're not looking for it to diminish the quality of design and construction, but to improve it. Thus saving time, saves valuable funds, which can also be better utilized in the planning and building of schools, greater schools in our communities. And so that's basically the background, just some highlights of what the certification is going to be about. But if there's any questions that anyone might have, I have no problem with entertaining some of those.
Are there any questions for Clarence? Secretary Churchill.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have no questions. I just wanted to thank the designees, the IAC, the AGs, who all were in active and focused discussion to bring this document into focus. And so this is a collaborative work, and we do thank everyone for taking the time over the many months to get it to the point that it's in. I echo Clarence's note in terms of the business management system. All parties need to work cooperatively and from a unified platform for effectiveness, and that's all what we should be doing, is looking at what's the most effective use of the state's time and money to move projects forward. So,
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Clarence, would you read the motion?
Yes, so to approve the Department of General Services LEA DD and CD review certification process as outlined in the attached documents to allow DGS to certify LEAs that meet the requirements of the process to begin conducting design reviews in lieu of design reviews required for the public school construction program by the Department of General Services.
All right. Do we have a motion to approve?
Motion.
Do we have a second? Second. All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, now let's move to section 3 of your notebook. This is the fiscal year 2020 state cost share percentages, page 35. This is a function that the IAC does on a, used to be, was it 3 years? Now it's, Kim, I'm going to let you talk because you know more about it than I do, so go
Okay,
ahead.
good morning.
Good morning.
In the summer of 2017, Maryland State Department of
Yes.
Education and IAC collaboratively calculate the state cost share percentages for 19, 20, and 21 in accordance with the regulation that was in effect at that time. And it required an update every 3 years. Enactment of House Bill 1783 changed that requirement to every 2 years. And we anticipate working again collaboratively with MSDE to perform the updates for FY 21 and 22 this spring after the legislative session. As you can see in the backup material, there's a chart that's titled State Cost Share Amounts. And in that chart, the first column shows the FY 2018 figures that had been adopted, and then the second column shows the FY 2019 figures that had been adopted by the Board of Public Works in October of 2017. And they approved the calculated figures for 9 counties that saw increases. They held harmless the 9 counties that saw a decrease calculation, and then, of course, the 6 that remained the same as the figure in FY 2018. The third column shows those figures that were calculated for the 3 years and in 2017. And then for your action today, we're requesting your approval of the FY 20 state cost share amounts that are applicable to the FY 20 capital improvement program recommendations. And that chart is on the back of the agenda item on page 36. Are there any questions?
Well, I'd like to, we had an issue the time we did this about the cost shares decreasing. And in a time when we are interested in doing as much as we can in school construction in Maryland, I think I would like to make a motion that we do not decrease any school systems amounts and that they remain harmless as we did the last time we voted on this. So I'm willing to discuss this and certainly offer this to my other colleagues and what they think about it, but I'm concerned about any decreases in our participation in school construction.
Madam
Secretary
Chair-
Churchman.
Madam Chair, thank you, yes. I would concur with your evaluation of where we are today. We're at an inflection point where all voices are talking about providing more funding for our LEAs, and I think although this is driven by formula, it would just be sending a wrong signal to take away funding from 9 jurisdictions. So I would agree with your assessment.
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
As being new on the commission, could I get some clarification of the formula that drives these cost share figures?
Yes.
So the main base is the foundation formula that is calculated by MSDE, and then there are 6 add-ons. You can see that information here in the regulation document that's been provided, in item on the second page. See item number 3, and then A is the foundation program, and then the state aid provided to the LEA by the Guaranteed Tax Base Program. That's an add-on, 20% of the amount of which the LEA's free and reduced price meal. That's an additional add-on. 5% of the county where the LEA is located in a Maryland county that has an unemployment rate greater than 1.5 times the state average unemployment rate. And then 5% of the county where the LEA is located is a Maryland county that has a per capita income below 67% of the state average per capita income. And then item F, the difference between the percentage growth in the LEA's full-time equivalent enrollment as defined by the education article. And then the last item is the 10 times the amount by which the county's local board's total outstanding school construction debt at the end of the second prior fiscal year, plus the county's total school construction expenditures from its operating budget from the fourth to the second prior fiscal year exceeds 1%. So these are the factors that are used in that calculation.
Thank you.
It's the base program and then the add-ons. MSDE provides the majority of this information, and the IAC provides item G. We contact the locals and we get their outstanding bond debt and then the last 3 fiscal years of PAYGO expenditures.
Thank you.
And I was going to say, Steve Brooks with Maryland State Department of Education has a PowerPoint presentation that he has shared in the past with committees to explain all of the calculations that are involved. It's pretty
It's very
intense.
complicated.
Yeah, it is a complicated
It is.
calculation.
It's very complicated, which is why it's nice to look at fiscal year 19 and just keep it the way it is, in my opinion. Other discussion or questions on this information? All right, I'm going to make a motion then to approve the continuation of the use of fiscal 19 percentages for the share cost. So I don't know if I have anyone to second that.
Second.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. All in favor of keeping the state and local cost share percentages the same as fiscal year 19, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Madam Chair,
Oh, Brian, are you on?
Yes, I'm on.
I'm so sorry. I didn't recognize that you were on. Brian Gibbons is on the phone today. And Brian, was your vote to, I didn't hear your vote. Was it an aye or or a no?
An aye for the motion, yes.
Thank you so much, Brian. All right, so we have unanimous. We can then move on to section 4.
Madam Chair, before we
Yes.
move on, we will work with the LEAs on the current projects that you heard last meeting and make the adjustments.
Great, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
just looking at the table, I noticed that fiscal year 2019 does not include the Maryland School for the Blind, which is in fiscal year 20. Does that change?
It's 93%.
Right, does that
it-
include,
it
does
is
our motion?
included. Yes,
Yes.
that is included. Somehow it didn't get on that chart, but it's on the chart that I have, so.
Okay.
It's 90, it stays, actually theirs stays at 93%. There was no change for their state cost contribution.
That percentage isn't performed in part of the calculation, so that may be why it's not in
Maybe
that
that's
chart.
why it wasn't in there, but it's on my other chart. Okay, thanks, good question. All right, let's move on to,
If I just may
Yes,
clarify, it's in
sure.
regulation specifically that School for the Blind gets 93% of its.
okay, so we're going to move on to section 4, which is the Baltimore City HVAC project allocations, and here comes Jamie. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, I'm on. All right, good morning. At the December meeting of the IAC, members asked for more detail on the state response to the extreme cold weather-related school facilities closures in Baltimore City back in January. So before I get to the action item, I'd like to provide a status report
Great.
on the state response to weather-related school closures in Baltimore City.
Yeah, I see him.
There is a handout in your book you can follow along with. I would like to start by mentioning that according to the National Weather Service, the average temperature in Baltimore for the first week of 2018 was just over 15 degrees, and it did not reach above freezing until the end of the week. That record-setting cold had a tremendous impact on Baltimore City Public Schools facilities, where according to city schools, equipment failures forced the closure of 137 programs and 126 facilities. As you know, on January 8th, Governor Hogan provided $2.5 million in order to support city schools in work orders and repairs for the impacted facilities. And as of December 24, 95% of those funds had been distributed to 232 reimbursements, work orders, and to improve 115 impacted schools. The budget bill, Senate Bill 186, included the extra $15 million that we have been talking about. Since the passage of that bill, the IAC has worked with city schools to determine an appropriate allocation process. In August, the IAC approved waivers to allow the money to be allocated in a way consistent with the process that we had determined. And on September 10th, we published a website to receive those submissions. After the last meeting in December, we worked with city schools to finalize some expectations, I guess, on pacing, on how fast to spend this money, and provided some specific procedure guidance, which specifies that the extra $15 million must be allocated by June 30th, 2019. As of the 24th of December, IC has allocated about 13.5% of those funds over 3 projects. Right now, we have 1 project pending for $19,360, and we anticipate, based on earlier communications with the city, another 38 roughly submissions to spend the balance of the funds. So of the 126 facilities, which would be about 3/4 of all city schools facilities, impacted by the cold. The combined $17.5 million is anticipated to provide up to 272 reimbursements and allocations to 120 facilities. That is 95% of the impacted facilities. In addition to the reimbursements and allocations that I've detailed in this report, I'd just also like to mention that city schools also responded in their own way, spending $1.2 million in local funds to add Wi-Fi enabled temperature sensors in 73 buildings, and plans to complete phase 2, which will add Wi-Fi enabled sensors or remote temperature monitoring to the rest of their facilities by the end of the fiscal year. Now, before I get on to the action item, I would say despite the massive and fast response, both on the state and local level to this extreme cold impacts, and even if it were more massive and faster, because even new schools are vulnerable to extreme cold, and because city schools are the oldest in the state, there's still a chance that extreme cold will again impact Baltimore City schools, although I think it would be fair to expect less so. But still, there is a chance, which means that there is still work to do, and which leads me to item 4 before you. Before I go there, if there are any questions?
Senator.
I know Baltimore City is not the only system with old buildings. So can you tell us if there are other systems that are having the same kind of issues?
I can tell you that to the extent that the issues were had in January, not as much. But I cannot tell you the extent to which other LEAs experienced impacts from the cold
We
weather.
had a pretty warm January, too.
This, well, after the first week of January,
After the first-
right, it did get quite warm.
Thank you.
Senator, on your question, Jamie is specifically assigned to Baltimore City, and he's our only project manager. I have talked to a number of the LEAs during that weather event last year, and there were others that were affected, even Montgomery County. There was, besides the equipment, there was pressure problems with the natural gas, and I think a lot of areas were affected by that because of the huge demand.
Thank you.
Other questions for Jamie on the update? Thank you for that, Jamie. That was very helpful.
Great, and as I think you can expect to get more information on this
Great.
as time moves on, and to understand how the money is being spent along the way.
All right.
Madam Chair, may I have
Yes,
a
sir.
question? Jamie, of the 38 anticipated allocations, approximately the status of, are the facilities specifically identified, plans underway? What?
Well, before I go there, I will mention that Dr. Lynette Washington is in the audience with some of her staff, and certainly
So, Dr. Washington, please come forward, and you can give us an update. That would be very helpful. Thank you. Thank you for being here today.
Okay. So I'm joined here with the Director of Maintenance, Facility Maintenance is Blaine Lipsky, and also the Assistant Director of Mechanical Services and Engineering. And that's where all of our HVAC projects come out of that department. That's Jeff Wilson. And so what our status is that we submitted probably, I would say probably maybe sometime in August, September, we submitted a full list of all of the projects that we were going to be considering. And then we've started to submit projects. I think that for us, we just needed very clear guidance on how to move forward with the projects. What were the expectations? And so now that we have that guidance, then we can begin to submit. I would say that our projects are both in kind and also some that have to require design. So the ones that require design, there is going to take a little bit of time for that design to happen so that the cost estimates can be prepared for us to submit those projects. But we have the full list. All of them are identified by all of our schools. I think that our total cost came up to be about $16 million. We know that we're not going to submit that full. But we have a number of schools that we're going to be submitting, the 30, I believe it's about 32 schools that we're going to be submitting for projects.
So we should be seeing them upcoming.
Yes.
Okay. Other questions?
No, thank you.
All right, so Jamie, you want to present today's project? Thank you, Dr. Washington.
Absolutely. Well, I think as far as background information, most of that has been gone over. The capital budget bill allocated an extra $15 million for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning improvements in Baltimore City Public Schools. At the August 30th meeting of the IAC, certain COMAR provisions were waived in order for the money to be spent in a manner consistent with the intentions of the General Assembly. At this time, Baltimore City has requested one project totaling $19,630 in construction funding. This will be the fourth allocation from the appropriation. We'll leave a balance of funding of $12,966,050. The project is for the replacement of 3 sections of boiler at the Harlem Park building. It is a project that the IAC staff, including representatives from Maryland Department of Education, Department of Planning, and Department of General Services, have reviewed, and the project request is recommended for approval. If there are any questions, I'll take them before I read the motion.
Any questions? All right,
Great.
do we have a motion to approve?
Well, allow me to read it.
Oh, I'm sorry,
No sweat.
getting ahead of you.
The motion is to approve Baltimore City HVAC projects as presented with the state allocations identified to be funded through the $15 million for Baltimore City HVAC improvements included in 2018's SB 186.
Now, do we have a motion to approve?
Move.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
All right, motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Jamie.
Great, thank you.
Now, if we can move to section 5, we're going to talk about the school safety grant applications, and Joan's going to give us an update on where we are. This is just an informational item, by the way, no actions required. Thank you, Joan.
Thank you. As you said, this item is informational, and it's an update to the report that we have been presenting so far. So we just keep adding to the same report, makes it easy to follow for everyone. So as of December 31st, the report behind the item shows that applications for 90 projects from 10 LEAs were submitted and approved. Those projects total $2.1 million in allocations. The report also shows, I believe it's highlighted, 12 applications have been submitted by 2 other LEAs and are in the review process right now. We also just received another submission from an LEA that adds 5 projects of a new project type, bi-directional amplifiers, new to the category list. That will address the problem that some schools have of insufficient radio, what they call insufficient radio coverage in parts of the building. This will bring the total number of requests up to 107. So just to give you some idea where we are in all of this, of the 24 LEAs plus Maryland School for the Blind, 11 LEAs and Maryland School for the Blind have not yet submitted any requests. 2 LEAs have made partial requests so far, so we expect additional requests from them. So I've either spoken with or I have heard from through email all of the LEAs. I haven't yet heard from Maryland School for the Blind, but they all are working hard on this. We expect 5 more submissions in January, 2 more in February, and then of the remaining, it looks like they all know their projects, but they're held up either by finding the funding, where it comes from, and they are expecting to do that way ahead of time. And they're also held up a little bit by decisions that have to come from above them on types of or what projects. To give you an idea, Allegheny is looking at 3 security vestibules, I believe it is. They have enough funding, they believe, for 2.5, but not quite enough for 3. So they're waiting to make a decision on how to do that and which ones. And then there is one LEA that is going ahead and doing their design of their security vestibule, and they just want to get a better idea of the cost before they submit. So I think everything is moving along quite well.
So we expect them to meet the deadline and everybody get what they need.
Yes, we do expect them to meet. There might be maybe one or two that we don't hear from until March. But everyone else seems to be moving pretty quickly.
All right, are there questions about these grants or the progress?
I have a question.
Yes, Senator.
The end-of-life decision, is that a timing decision, or is it that something breaks?
I'm not sure I follow
Okay,
you.
well, because it says security communications to replace the security camera servers that have reached the end of life. Well, so
Oh.
how have we determined
Okay.
the end of life? Is it because they don't work anymore, or is it because you just keep them a certain amount of time?
I will have to ask.
I can
Yeah,
answer that
but-
question. In technology, end-of-life can be between series of changes of technology. So whenever a LEA goes to add additional cameras so that they have the coverage they believe they need for security, they have to retire some cameras that may even still be working because their end of their technological life to be able to interface with the new system isn't there. So they have to replace the entire system.
What happens to those?
They can sell them. It's their property. They can donate them to somebody that would provide the sufficient coverage for the use. But we see this oftentimes with like fire alarm systems that are very important, where we might have hardwired alarm systems that could last for another 20 years, but whenever we do addressable systems so that they can be set up as we want them in locations, you have to retire the old ones.
Planned obsolescence.
Yes, you can say that, yes.
That's a good term.
Yeah.
Yes, a better term.
Are
Other
there any
questions?
Other questions?
I was just curious.
All right, thank you, Joan, appreciate that, and I'm sure you'll be back next month to update us again.
Oh, yes.
All right, and then I know we need to go to section 6, which is, Bob, your report on the education specifications work group.
So, Madam Chair, I'm just going to introduce it because we have two of your members, two of our members, Brian and Dick, on there. In the first page of this you've seen before, it names who the members of the educational work group are, the objectives. The second page in, you'll see a graphic that lays out a high level that was discussed at the first meeting of the educational specifications work group so that we could all agree on a focus in our discussions. There's so much to talk about whenever we get into discussions of how do we keep facilities there for our kids and working properly, that everybody agreed that we could focus that we want to have educationally effective and fiscally sustainable, that those two have to be in balance. You can't do one without the other. And that has really allowed, I think, a very productive discussion through that Brian and Dick can talk about. In the bottom, the facility management process flow is there just for your information. While this is called the Educational Specification Work Group, which is the most critical part of decision-making for capital expenditures, we wanted to demonstrate how that fits in with the total life of ownership. The things that happen before it and the things that happen after it. That ed spec is a pivot point. Decisions that are made there that might say cause a facility to be too expensive, too large, too small, affect the entire life of the facility. Therefore, the front part is part of that decision. How do we collect data? How do we analyze it and do good planning? So in the end, we want to work for a process of full disclosure. And there is some information in your package later on to discuss that. And Dick, if you wouldn't mind filling in the good details, please.
All right, well, I'm not sure how detailed I can be, but I'd like to point out that I think that the meetings have been very productive and informative and the discussions have really delved deeply into the process and the effects, and of course the work group includes a number of representatives of LEAs. And some of the themes have been, for example, how do we balance between IAC guidelines and a perception that, well, it's not a guideline, it's a rule. We can't deviate from that. And so in reviewing square footage discussions and cost per square foot and cost per student and the impacts of those discussions, always trying to keep in mind that the goal is for the LEAs to have the independence to design their own facilities, using the IAC guidelines. So if you look at in your book, Educational Development Spec Work Groups Overview of Progress, you'll see a number of the topic areas that have been reviewed and looked into by the work group. And so MSDE Facilities Design Standards and Guidelines reviewed to ensure that the standards and guidelines are aligned with the space allowance for each type of space, health suites, classrooms, community areas, et cetera, and are not overly specific and make recommendations as needed. Again, these are to be guidelines where the local jurisdictions can make their own decisions relative to these spaces, but having guidelines that relate to state funding, at the end of the day, relate to state funding. A lot of discussion about square foot, utilization of square foot costs versus cost per student. A little bit later, I think you'll see we get into regional difference discussions to account for the fact that construction costs vary from region to region. I don't have a tremendous background in school construction per se, but have built across the state of Maryland, and I can assure you that construction costs vary substantially across the state, and some of it is a function of labor costs, and some of it is a function of availability of resources and subcontractors and suppliers. The more remote regions of the state, far western Maryland, Eastern Shore, simply don't have as many qualified subcontractors as exist in the greater Baltimore, Washington metropolitan area, and so as a result, travel costs and premiums are required to entice people to work there. Life cycle.
Brian is on the phone. Can we turn that up?
Yeah, I just muted the
Thank
mic,
you.
but he wishes to speak.
Go ahead, Brian.
I'm okay. I think that it's been, I think Dick kind of covered everything that we're talking about. I think that the challenge is to come up with a proper framework to have the appropriate incentives, essentially, for the LEAs as well as the IAC to meet, while meeting the educationally effective and getting the biggest bang for our buck in the fiscally sustainable side of this equation. And I found it to be extraordinarily interesting and educational. I know Dick feels the same way. But I think we'll have some pretty refined recommendations by the time we're done with this work group.
Thank you, Brian. Dick, you have other comments you want to make?
Oh, I just wanted to make the point a minute ago that a focus of the group has not simply been on construction costs, but on total costs, lifetime costs, life cycle costs, and again, focusing the metrics to incorporate and recognize the total life costs rather than simply the construction costs. And I just wanted to support what Brian said. There a lot of discussion about incentives. So the idea being to, with LEAs to have the independence to design their facilities and to encourage them through increased percentage of state funding with incentives to be more efficient in the design of their facilities. How many points that you want, that I think I should elaborate further?
I think that's a good overview, but there'll be recommendations that come out of this that are specific to the legislation. There are recommendations that will come out of this that are not specific to the legislation, but you can't ignore them, and there'll be good recommendations. Some of them may require legislation. Some of them may simply be something that the IAC will want to come back and look at. For instance, as we talked about regional cost differences, one of the discussions at the last meeting was maybe the IAC creates a 2.5% contingency. It's been something that the LEAs have been used to individually in the past, but maybe a agency contingency. So on a case-by-case basis, if there is a need, they can convince the IAC of that need, that there would be a reserve to be able to help that district to continue forward with the project. So lots of good ideas. The last piece in here is the EdSpec tool that we introduced at the last meeting, and this is trying to tie together this cost per student understanding with, I understand from Senator Rosapep, and he has Senate Bill 71 that set a bar of a dollar amount of an average of all the schools, and that works well in some cases as intended. Smaller school districts that require more square foot per student, they're at a disadvantage, while the larger population schools would be an advantage to that. So the work group discussed that and found that maybe we can do the same thing by using the square footage in our guidelines that they are part of the table 102B and calculate this out on a school-by-school basis. Therefore, with that kind of thinking, it ties into the EdSpec process. And so what you have, just to see where we're at, is this sheet that could become part of our EdSpecs, could become part of our certification program, or for all projects where, as a project comes forward, this becomes a full disclosure statement to the EdSpec, so that not only do you understand the cost of construction initially, but the estimated cost to own using base standards, and there's information I won't go over that are used in the industry as far as percentage of the maximum allowable construction cost, that project cost, or to calculate life cycle costs for each project, which is what we would prefer. So we've got a lot of things moving at once. We have to develop standards and life cycle costs. We are already working on the square foot per student that Dick talked about that varies in the table of 102B. We'll meet with the planners next week. We've had several meetings with them so that we can come up to what I call an agreement about what is the right size to build a school, so that educational programs, the educational sufficiency standards that you've provided plus everything else can be supported. So it's a lot of pieces that are working together. I think one thing to members that might be beneficial is this diagram, which is kind of the same as the linear diagram with the EdSpecs. It shows that, you know, the construction process, whenever we make that decision and actually build, that's the one that we should have had a lot of decisions before and after it that lead up to that point. It's not the place where we ought to be discussing things. We've decided and we move forward with it. And it's really interesting that the cost of a school building runs about 8% of the total cost of that ownership, including salaries. Teachers are the main thing. Right. You know, it's about the teachers, it's about the kids. And the building, though, needs to be able to support that in a very good way. And it's the smallest cost. Whenever we look at all of the money that's being spent from the taxpayers, it's the smallest cost, but we've got to do it right.
But it is what the taxpayer sees.
That's right.
Right.
And that's exactly right. And that's why we're trying to create this full disclosure so the taxpayer understand that it's not just that first cost, it's fixing the roof, the HVAC system, upgrading the science room, and everything else that we have to do in order to keep it. And as you can see in this example, it cost as much to own and operate this example, cost a little bit more to own and operate, that's that $46,800,000 at the bottom, than it did to build it initially, which is the $44,900,000. And that's not well understood, but it's what we have to communicate. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you for that explanation. Are there questions for either Bob, Brian, or Dick? I just wanted to say, I think the idea of looking at the total cost of ownership is really important. As a sitting superintendent in a small district, I didn't build many schools, but it certainly is something we should be thinking about going forward. And that calculation really surprised me, that over the life cycle of a school, that it could cost, double the amount that it costs to build it. So I think it's great information.
I have a
So,
question.
yes, Senator Hoffman.
Do we ask the schools to do this? Do we ask them to think about the future and the life cycle cost? I mean, there's going to be a huge difference between a small school and one of the giant schools in one of the bigger counties. So I'm sure we need some kind of an adjustment for that. But I think the counties have been really cautious about deciding to build a new school because of the cost. So how sure are we about the 92% of the cost of ownership is salaries and 6% is heating and all the rest of that? I mean, is that something we can rely on, or does it need to be looked at frequently?
Very good question, and thank you. The way that we account, the cost elements that we use in school accounting because the larger amount is really about teaching, on the facility side, it's a little weak. To be able to have that kind of data to carry forward and do analysis. The percentages that we are using for our rough estimate costs before we do the specific life cycle cost analysis are those percentages shown. And they come from the National Institute of Building Sciences and the studies they've done through a large population. So it's not just schools that use those percentages. Where we would like to get, but they're reasonable percentages based upon that. Where we would like to get is to look at in the back of that presentation is the National Council on School Facilities, definitions of key facility data elements. If we could get to the point where we're keeping track of our cost of ownership of the facilities using these categories, we would know over time specifically what it cost every school LEA and every school individually to own and operate. It would be a good measure. If you're not measuring, you're just practicing, and that's kind of where we've been to this point.
If I could comment, I think that to answer the senator's question, I think that the figures on maintenance and operating costs are pretty relatively reliable based on a large amount of data, and the construction costs are as well. And so it seems to me that the non-physical related, non-facility related costs should be fairly easy to understand on a per school basis, so that you could get a better sense of how closely those percentages align with the schools in your district.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I would just say that some of this has to be done ahead of time. In other words, you want to know this information before you
Right.
build,
Yes,
to the extent possible.
and I think that in general, that's quite feasible to accomplish within a range. You certainly can't know the final cost of a facility until it's designed, but you can understand its probable range of cost based on number of students.
Are there huge differences among our schools in this arena? Or does it have to do with when a school was designed and built?
Yeah, I think it has more to do with that. And, you know, a lot of our school
When
systems now.
money was cheap.
Right, exactly. And also, a lot of our school systems, Howard, for example, they're using the same design for all elementary schools. So, you know, it's a pattern, and it saves them a lot of money on design and the build. So it's, I think everyone's trying to make smart decisions about school construction, because they know that there's much to do and the money is limited. All right, any other questions? I do want to just make a comment. I have a conflict for the next meeting, which is February the 14th, and I was wondering if people would be able to change that meeting to February the 12th, if that's a Tuesday. If that doesn't suit, then I'm going to ask one of my colleagues to take over the chair's role. So if you would take a look at your calendars and let me know if that will work.
I'm good.
Good?
I'm good.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I will be away as well, and
Okay.
either, I can call in, either
Oh, that
day.
would be great.
I can call in on either day,
Okay,
but I will not be here.
okay. Todd, how about you?
Probably. I don't
Okay,
keep my phone
yeah.
on my calendar. I don't keep my
Okay.
calendar on my phone, but
Okay.
I should be able to make it work either way.
All right. Brian, are you okay with, if we switch to Tuesday?
Yes, that's fine with me.
Okay, all right, well then we will schedule our next IAC meeting for February the 12th. Thank you all very much for being flexible about that. And if there's no other business to come before the IAC today, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? All right, thank you all for your time today, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.